Most people know Isaiah 6 for the seraphim and the coal and the "Here I am, send me." That's where the Instagram quotes come from. Almost nobody keeps reading to verse 9. That's where God gives Isaiah his actual job description. And it is one of the strangest things in the Bible. Go and tell this people, keep on hearing, but do not understand. Keep on seeing, but do not perceive. Make their heart dull, their ears heavy, blind their eyes. That's not a warning that the mission might get hard. That's the mission itself. Go speak. They won't get it. Speak anyway. I've read Isaiah 6 probably 20 times. For years, my brain just slid past that part and went back to the burning coal. Then one day, I actually stopped and sat with verses 9 and 10. And I had this question I couldn't shake. Why would you send someone knowing they'd be ignored? To even begin answering that, you have to understand what a prophet actually is. The Hebrew word is navi, mouthpiece, spokesman. It's the same word used when God tells Moses that Aaron will be his prophet to Pharaoh, meaning Aaron will be the voice, Moses will be the source. The prophet speaks for someone else. That's the whole job. Which means the message doesn't belong to the prophet. They don't own it. They carry it. That distinction matters more than it sounds because of what happens next. Here's what I started noticing when I actually paid attention to how these call narratives unfold. Every single one of them is interrupted. Nobody is in a prophetic posture when God shows up. Isaiah is in the temple, probably as a worshiper, not as anyone with authority. Jeremiah is in his hometown, likely a teenager. Ezekiel is sitting on a riverbank in Babylon, hundreds of miles from Jerusalem, in exile. Moses is watching someone else's sheep in the middle of the desert. Amos is a fig farmer. Jonah is just living his life. God makes the first move every single time. The prophet never comes looking. That's not coincidence. The false prophets, the ones who tell people what they want to hear, they show up constantly throughout these books as the contrast case. They seek the platform. The real ones didn't. Most of them tried to get out of it entirely. Which is the part I genuinely find fascinating. Moses has 5 objections. 5. God calls him at the burning bush, and Moses starts negotiating. Who am I to go to Pharaoh? God responds. What if they ask your name? God responds. What if they don't believe me? God gives him signs. I'm slow of speech. God says, I made your mouth. And then finally, and this is the one that seems to actually try God's patience, please, send someone else. That's when God gives him Aaron as a co-speaker, not as punishment, as a concession. Jeremiah says he can't speak because he's a na'ar. That word gets translated as young, but it's more than that. Na'ar is the word used for servants, for people without social standing, for someone who doesn't have a voice in the room. Jeremiah isn't just saying he's too young. He's saying he's nobody. Isaiah, right after the seraphim, right after the coal touches his lips and he's supposedly commissioned, his first words aren't courage. They're, woe to me. I am ruined. I am a man of unclean lips. He has to be cleaned up just to respond. And then there's Jonah, who doesn't push back at all. He just runs. Due east was Nineveh. He gets on a ship going west, toward Tarshish, which was likely the coast of Spain, as far in the opposite direction as the ancient world would take you. One prophet, one direction, a way. Here's my read on why this keeps happening. A prophet who wants the role is the last person you should trust with it. The willingness to push back, the awareness of inadequacy, the hesitation, that's not a flaw in the selection. It is the selection. The ones who know what it's going to cost them are the ones you can trust to carry a message they didn't write. And the message is almost always the same. You can pick up virtually any prophetic book and find the same three movements. An accusation, specific, often uncomfortable, aimed at economic injustice and empty religious ritual, as much as anything theological. Then a consequence. That's where the fire and brimstone reputation comes from. And then, almost always, buried in the final section, and therefore the part most people skip, a promise. Jeremiah is the prophet most associated with doom. He predicts the fall of Jerusalem. He watches it happen. He sits in the rubble and writes lamentations. And then, in the same book, he writes a letter to the exiles in Babylon, telling them to plant gardens, build houses, pray for the city they were taken to. Because there's a future. And yet, almost none of them are listened to. In their own time. By the people they're sent to. Which takes us back to that strange commission in Isaiah 6. God doesn't warn Isaiah that the mission will be hard. He describes the mission as making people's hearts duller, not sharper. And that exact phrase, whether they hear or refuse to hear, shows up in Ezekiel's commission too. Same words. Two prophets, more than a century apart, handed the same job description. Jeremiah is arrested, thrown into a cistern. He writes in the middle of his own book that he wished he'd never been born. That's not humility for show. That's an honest record of what this cost him. So why? Why commission 20 prophets over 800 years if the people keep not listening? Why build an entire literary tradition around voices that were ignored in their own time? Here's what I think is actually happening. The message was never only for those people. The scroll had to outlast the audience. Hebrews 1:1 opens this way. Long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets, but in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son. That phrase, many times, is the tell. It wasn't one message to one generation. It was the same message, said differently, by different people, in different centuries, pointing at the same thing from different angles. Moses said a greater prophet was coming. Deuteronomy 18. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me. Jesus points at Jonah in Matthew 12 and says the only sign this generation is going to get is the sign of Jonah. 3 days in the fish, 3 days in the earth. And when you lay out the pattern that runs through every prophetic life, interrupted by a call you didn't seek, confronted with your own inadequacy before you go, sent with a message that wasn't yours, rejected by people who should have recognized it, that pattern shows up again in the Gospels. The baptism, Gethsemane, the Sermon on the Mount, the crucifixion. Isaiah didn't read Jeremiah. Amos wasn't aware he was contributing to something Ezekiel would continue. None of them could see the full shape. But the shape emerged anyway, across 800 years and 20 different voices, because they were all working from the same source material.
The reason that commission made sense, the reason God could tell Isaiah to go speak to people who wouldn't hear, is that the message was never going to stay in that room. It was going onto a scroll. The scroll was going to outlive the empire. The message was going to survive every king and every exile and every generation that buried it. And eventually, the person the pattern had been sketching, without any of them fully realizing it, arrived. The prophets weren't just messengers. They were a long, costly, largely ignored rehearsal for someone they never completely saw. And they went anyway.
If this kind of reading interests you, pulling a thread through the whole Bible instead of just the parts that get quoted, I put out new content here every week. Next video, we're going into one specific prophet and the structure inside his book that almost nobody talks about. Stick around.